evening. My name is Sarah Watson, and I am pleased to welcome you to tonight's show, Abraham Lincoln and the Illinois Supreme Court, which is this month's Looking for Lincoln Conversation. Looking for Lincoln Conversations is a series of live, virtual programs featuring a variety of topics surrounding the life and times of Abraham Lincoln. For more information about upcoming conversations, and to see the Looking for Lincoln website, please go to lookingforlincoln.org. I'm also pleased to say that this program is funded in part by a grant from the Illinois Arts Council. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Chris Vallillo.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Welcome, folks, to another Lincoln Conversations live stream. Like you just heard, we are here tonight to discuss Abraham Lincoln and the Illinois Supreme Court. Now, as we present our program this evening, be sure to jot down any thoughts or questions you might have into the chat or on a notepad. If you put them into the chat at the end of the show, when we have a question and answer period, I'll ask as many questions as we have time for. Now, during his 25-year legal career, Abraham Lincoln and his law partners would try over 400 cases before the Illinois Supreme Court, an impressive number by any standard. Now, while Lincoln's skills as a circuit-riding trial lawyer are well known, William Herndon, Lincoln's last law partner, once said, "He was greatest, in my opinion, as a lawyer in the Illinois Supreme Court." Here, as another of Lincoln's colleagues once said, clarity, conciseness, and simplicity of statement were his forte. His mind was orderly. He could marshal facts in such an orderly sequence and reduce a complicated problem to such simple terms that even the dullest layman could not fail to understand. Well, tonight we're joined by two of the leading Illinois scholars in Illinois. Two of the leading Lincoln scholars in Illinois, John Lupton and Sam Wheeler. And we will be exploring that very subject. John Lupton is the historian for the Illinois Supreme Court and the director of the Illinois Supreme Court Historic Preservation Commission. And Sam Wheeler is the director of history programs for the Illinois Supreme Court History Preservation Commission. He also formerly worked at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum. These two gentlemen are both extremely well-versed in Abraham Lincoln and the Illinois Supreme Court. Folks, please welcome John Lupton and Sam Wheeler.
Thank you, Chris. I want to start out by thanking Chris, Heather, and Sarah for inviting us to speak here today about, what do you think, John? One of our favorite subjects, Abraham Lincoln's legal career, specifically his practice before the Illinois Supreme Court. And as I was thinking about tonight, as we were preparing, as I was coming in, I was asking myself, how did I get interested in this topic? I grew up in Springfield. I feel like if you're from Springfield, you grow up, you live your life surrounded by Abraham Lincoln in so many ways. It wasn't until I got into college that I really seriously studied the life and legacy of Abraham Lincoln. But how did I get interested in this subtopic of Lincoln studies, his time as a lawyer, its significance for the person that we revere as maybe America's greatest president? When I was in college as an undergrad, I was fortunate enough to get a job giving tours one summer at the old state capitol in Springfield and the Lincoln Herndon Law Office, a awesome historic site here in Springfield, where you literally can walk on the very floorboards Abraham Lincoln and his law partner, William Herndon, walked on. And it was an amazing experience to be able to sort of walk folks through Abraham Lincoln's legal career. And it gave me a real appreciation about how significant that aspect of Abraham Lincoln's life was, his 25-year career as a lawyer. John, how did you get interested in Abraham Lincoln and his background as a lawyer? And I will say, we're privileged tonight to have you on. I think you are one of the foremost scholars of Abraham Lincoln's legal career. How did you get there?
Well, first of all, thanks, Sam, for saying that. I appreciate that. And I do just want to say a quick thanks for, to Sarah and Heather and Chris for having us on tonight. But to answer your question, mine goes back actually a little bit farther than yours. I grew up in Shelbyville, which is one of the towns on Lincoln's 8th Circuit. Excuse me. And I just remember I'm not even sure how old I was, 8, 9, 10 years old. And I saw the rock on the courthouse square that has the plaque on it that said, Abraham Lincoln practiced here while riding the 8th Circuit. And, as a 10-year-old kid, I was just stunned that a president of the United States was in my hometown, my very small 5,000 population hometown. And, not just a president, but as you said, arguably the greatest president in our country's history was in my hometown. So that kind of got me always kind of interested in Lincoln. But to be honest, when I was in an undergrad, I didn't even major in history. I took history classes just because I enjoyed them. And by the time I was a senior as an undergrad, my advisor said, you've got enough credits to have a double major with history. So I got a degree in both psychology and history, but I went on in history. So then just continued my interest in Lincoln from there.
So the first time we met, John, more than 20 years ago, if you can believe it.
When we were both 16 years old.
Right. Yeah. I was, again, lucky enough to land a position with the Lincoln Legal Papers. You, by that time, were already a seasoned editor. You had taken that project darn near to its conclusion when I came on board. What was the Lincoln Legal Papers, and what was the role that you played in that project? Because I think it's remarkable. It's an awesome experience that you had.
Well, thanks. Let me just back up 1 second to that, because I was going to SIU to do my PhD. And so I went to talk to John Simon, who I wanted to be my advisor, who I know was your advisor later on. But I went to him, I said, I want to be a Lincoln scholar. And he said, you need to leave SIU. So
I can hear him.
I'm not going to do the John Simon voice, but he told me, there's a project just got underway up in Springfield called the Lincoln Legal Papers. You should finish your master's degree up at Springfield, because there was no Sangamon State at the time, because they didn't have a terminal, or they only had a terminal master's degree, not a PhD. So I did. I got an internship, and I started traveling, basically, literally following in Lincoln's footsteps, going from courthouse to courthouse, looking for the documents that he and his partners created. We would make photocopies of all those documents, bring them back to Springfield for accessioning them, where we, put them into this massive database of 5,100 cases, 500 non-litigation activities, over 90,000 documents that we found. But, I also, probably one of the side perks to the job is that I learned how to correctly pronounce almost every place in Illinois. So, Vienna, Versailles, places like that. So you learn how to pronounce places in Illinois correctly.
So a lot of the folks, I imagine, that are listening to us tonight, they live in a community, not unlike what you said earlier about Shelbyville, that Abraham Lincoln practiced law. He came into their small town or their county and practiced his trade. That town had a brush with greatness before anybody thought Abraham Lincoln perhaps would be great. I think that project that you worked on is so significant because for a century and a half after Abraham Lincoln's death, when you would read a biography about Abraham Lincoln, there would be, I hesitate to say there would be a chapter on Abraham Lincoln's legal career. There would be a section about his legal career. And in my reading, before the 1990s. That section would be quite brief. It might tell a humorous anecdote, a joke that Mr. Lincoln might have used on the circuit, and invariably, that section would talk about how Abraham Lincoln was an honest lawyer, and he never took a case in which his whole heart wasn't into defending this person who had been wronged in some way. Mm-hmm. No statistical analysis of his legal career, no contextualization of what his legal career meant in Central Illinois or to Illinois. First off, is that caricature that lasted for a century and a half, is it correct? No, it's not correct. But what kind of a lawyer was Abraham Lincoln? That hard work that you and your colleagues did digging around in those courthouse basements, unearthing 100,000 primary documents, what's the picture of Abraham Lincoln as a lawyer that emerged?
Yeah, that's actually a good setup. But one thing I do want to point out is, you were talking about these biographies. There were maybe only, up until before we started our project, there were maybe 4 or 5 books about Lincoln's law practice. After we published, I think there was like a new book on his law practice coming out at least every year or every other year. Yeah. So, the work that we did kind of spawned this whole new body of literature in Lincoln's life. This myth that you talk about of him being a, this cause lawyer almost, I hate to say this if there are lawyers watching, but, the legal profession doesn't have the greatest of reputations. And it certainly didn't in Lincoln's time as well. And actually, Lincoln even said so himself in his notes for a law lecture. He said, if you can't, be an honest lawyer, you should resolve to be honest without being a lawyer. Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of these early biographers had this problem of rationalizing the fact that Lincoln was a lawyer, but he was also so honest. So, there's honest Abe, dishonest lawyer that they were kind of grappling with. So he became kind of this super lawyer, this kind of frontier lawyer who, only worked for the side of right. There's that aspect of it. But what we found, to answer your question, what we found is just that, he was a consummate general practice attorney. He had, he would take all sorts of cases as they came to him. So he was dealing with, divorce cases, replevin cases, criminal cases, basically anything that came before him, he would argue. So he was an extremely busy lawyer. As I said, we found over 5,100 cases over 25 years of his legal career, which we were kind of stunned at that number. Before we began the project, we were expecting to find maybe 2,000-3,000 cases. We found double that. Mm-hmm. So, just that he was an extremely busy attorney. And, he was kind of forced into that in some ways because, his rival, Stephen Douglas, he was licensed to practice about the same time as Lincoln, but he didn't handle nearly as many cases because he basically, took all these stepping stones to political office. But he was able to do that as a Democrat in a Democratic state, whereas Lincoln, the Whig, could not do that in a Democratic state.
So you have Lincoln traveling the circuit, being away from home, being away from Springfield, his wife and children, for about 6 months out of the year, traveling that 8th Judicial Circuit that we associate with Abraham Lincoln. But tonight, we're talking about this aspect of Mr. Lincoln's legal career, which is his time before the Illinois Supreme Court. The number that you cited earlier, 5,100 legal cases he and his partners handled during his legal career, is staggering. But the statistic that really opened my eyes, and during those tours of the Lincoln Herndon Law Office, when I would throw this number out, lawyers who understand the profession were always blown away by this number. That Abraham Lincoln, during his legal career, he and his partners had probably more than 400 cases before the Illinois Supreme Court. Was that number indeed extraordinary for Abraham Lincoln during his lifetime? How does that compare to the other lawyers that are working in Illinois? Would they have been in awe, perhaps, of Abraham Lincoln's extensive time before Illinois' highest court?
I think they would. Lincoln had the advantage of living in Springfield, which was the state capital, which is where the Illinois Supreme Court met, at least through, exclusively through 1848. So Lincoln, basically through his partnership with Stephen Logan, his second law partner, so kind of introduced him to a significant appellate legal career. And then that's kind of when Lincoln became known as a lawyer's lawyer. So lawyers from all over the state, whether they were in Shawneetown or Galena or Rockford or Chicago, would, they would reach out to other Springfield attorneys. But Lincoln did seem to get a little bit of a more of a share, I would say, of cases before the Illinois Supreme Court, just because that became kind of his expertise, arguing these appellate cases. So that way, someone from Shawneetown didn't have to do the 4 or 5 day journey to Springfield to argue the case. They would just hire Lincoln. And yeah, 400 cases, is significant. One other thing that we do have to realize is that at that time, there was no appellate court. By appellate, I mean an intermediate appellate court. So cases went directly from the circuit court to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court, basically that was the court of last resort in the state of Illinois.
And so during Abraham Lincoln's lifetime, he's practicing law under the first 2 constitutions in Illinois history. We're on our 4th constitution, and the Supreme Court in our lifetime is different than the Supreme Court that Abraham Lincoln would have recognized. I think that is significant. Can you talk just for a second about those cases, the statistics, the big difference, obviously, is that the Supreme Court today in Illinois gets to choose which cases that it wishes to handle during a term. Was that the same during Abraham Lincoln's lifetime?
No, they couldn't pick and choose. As I said, now today, if a court or if a case ends at the circuit court, the losing party can appeal, but it goes to the appellate court or the intermediate appellate court. And then if they continue on with it, it goes to the Illinois Supreme Court. So just quickly, real numbers here, there are about 3 million new cases filed in Illinois each year. The appellate court hears about 6,000, and then about 2,000 of those get appealed to the Supreme Court, but they only pick about 80 or so cases in which they hear arguments. So, I mean, it's a really, tight pyramid that before we get to the Supreme Court. But in Lincoln's time, the Supreme Court heard everything, and it changed quite a bit when Lincoln was practicing. It originally had 4 members, and then it went to 9 members, and then it went down to 3 members under the second Constitution. And then now we have 7 members, which is the number that it's been at since the 1870 Constitution.
And our justices are elected today, which is interesting.
Yes, right. Under the first Constitution, they were appointed by the Illinois General Assembly. And then in 1848, with our second Constitution, all the judicial positions became elective, which we still have that system today. So we have elective judges.
So when the state capital moves to Springfield, Abraham Lincoln is well positioned as a lawyer, literally right across the street from the Illinois Supreme Court. His caseload really expands rapidly before the Supreme Court. So geographic proximity might explain some of Lincoln's practice before the Supreme Court. I think that's certainly true. I think you were telling me the other day that you couldn't find evidence that he was involved in maybe just one Supreme Court case before the capital moved to Springfield.
Right. Yeah. I think there's only one case that I found him involved in Vandalia. And it was just a case that the record wasn't filed in time. So Lincoln motioned to dismiss the case. And so, boom, it's gone. So he didn't argue a case in Vandalia, but I believe he was involved in one case there.
So I was intrigued. Chris very astutely pointed out what William Herndon had to say about Abraham Lincoln's time before the Illinois Supreme Court. Herndon waxes almost poetically, talking about Abraham Lincoln is at his best when he is practicing before the Illinois Supreme Court. I find that interesting. Geographic proximity, that could explain some of it, but I also think you get to see Lincoln becoming more and more, he's honing his craft. He's becoming a better lawyer, and that can explain a lot of the increased caseload before the Supreme Court. What do you make of Herndon's comments that Abraham Lincoln, you can see him at his best as a lawyer when he's practicing in front of the Illinois Supreme Court? What is it about those cases and Lincoln before the Illinois Supreme Court versus the bread and butter of his practice when he's out there traveling the circuit?
Yeah, what Herndon said, continuing that statement, he said that, he was at his best at the Supreme Court because he had time to prepare and time to research and time to study. And Lincoln, a lot of his other contemporaries said that he was a case lawyer. So basically, that means that he didn't really understand a Replevin case, for example, until he had a Replevin case. And then he would just dive into that, learn everything about it, and then become extremely well-versed on Replevin law. And then obviously, Lincoln, as a very intelligent person, retained all this knowledge. So I think, Herndon is kind of, spot on there, is in that he was at his best at the Illinois Supreme Court. And another kind of interesting thing that Herndon says, just to kind of counter that a little bit, is that, Herndon also said that Lincoln was strikingly deficient in technicalities, which is actually at complete odds from being at his best at the Illinois Supreme Court, because basically for a case to get to the Supreme Court, there has to have been an error committed at the lower level. So basically everything that goes to the Supreme Court is a technicality. And I don't mean a technicality in the sense that it's just something that's only done for the purpose of delay, but it's something that is a real legal issue that needs to be decided that was in error at the lower level. So Lincoln had to figure out, whether, for example, a county had the right to tax a railroad when the state said that it was exempt from state taxes. That's a technicality. He also had to figure out whether a married woman could take property or bring property into a marriage, whether she could take it out after she divorced. Again, these are technical questions. So, and I think Lincoln thrived on those. So in one sense, Herndon is right. In one sense, Herndon is wrong. But that's kind of par for the course with a lot of Herndon recollections and his own research into Lincoln's life.
Oh, I love it. We talk about caricatures, and there's certainly a caricature of Lincoln's legal career, but William Herndon, what an interesting figure in the Lincoln story. One of my favorites for sure. Significant, no doubt about it. What is the popular picture of Herndon that sort of comes into my mind is, the person that Mary Lincoln describes, not exactly easy to get along with, right? Herndon, the lawyer, is the office lawyer. Abraham Lincoln is traveling the circuit while Herndon is back in the office, keeping business going. I learned tonight, John, that you were a history major and a psychology major. Could we use a little bit of psychology and try to get into William Herndon's mind when he tells us that Abraham Lincoln is at his best before the Illinois Supreme Court, yet he wasn't a very good technical lawyer? Talk about Herndon's role in that law firm. Can we say maybe how we can explain the difference there is Herndon is saying in a subtle way, I was there to help point out the technicalities because we had time to prepare these cases before the Supreme Court.
Well, there is some evidence to show, that Herndon did do a lot of this office work. Probably one of the best examples of that is, we have this commonplace book that Herndon used. A commonplace book is basically, it was just a book that they kept where they would record different cases that dealt with different subjects. So going back to my Replevin example, so Herndon would write down 6 or 7 cases that went before the Illinois Supreme Court or the Kentucky Supreme Court or wherever that dealt with Replevin. So they had that for future reference. And that's all in Herndon's hand. So he was doing a lot of that work for Lincoln. But, he also had his own Supreme Court practice in a sense. A lot of their cases they did together, but there were a handful of cases in which Herndon argued before the Supreme Court by himself. There was one in 47, I believe it was, that dealt with fencing. And, we find no evidence that Lincoln was ever involved in this case, but Herndon was involved in it from beginning to end at the Supreme Court. So the fact that he was just an office, scribe I don't think is accurate. The other thing, at least later on in his career with the circuit riding, is that I think it was in 1857, the Sangamon County was removed from the 8th Circuit. So the 8th Circuit was basically like McLean, Logan, some of those northeastern counties from Sangamon. And then Sangamon was put in, I believe, the 17th Circuit, which was Sangamon, Menard, Macoupin, Montgomery. And we actually found quite a bit of Herndon cases in those counties in the late 50s. So while Lincoln was traveling the 8th Circuit, Herndon was traveling the 17th Circuit. So, they were kind of, shows the dynamic of their partnership, I guess, in that, they both got their kind of separate spheres, but they also worked together when they needed to.
So one of the things about the law practice that I think it's important, we begin to put a little more meat on the bones. We begin to redefine these caricatures of these individuals. Abraham Lincoln's law practice, we're able to have a clearer sense because of all the great research you all did, digging around in those courthouse basements. I wonder about the researchers that are out there. What your project did for Abraham Lincoln's legal career, specifically before the Illinois Supreme Court, remarkable. It is a small window into 19th century Illinois, 19th century America to figure out what life was like, how the court is called upon to resolve these cases. So we have a little window, and that is because of Abraham Lincoln. I'm thinking of a larger contextual study, somebody out there that is able to contextualize Lincoln's practice before the Illinois Supreme Court. Maybe somebody would want to focus on half a dozen different lawyers in central Illinois to sort of compare and contrast. Where are the records for the Illinois Supreme Court? Are they in those courthouse basements in the counties? And how does one hatch a research project and then execute a research project like that?
The circuit level cases, they are either in the counties or in the Illinois Regional Archives Depository, which is the universities around the state each have an IRAD that house records when a county courthouse is basically bursting at the seams with storage space. Now, the Illinois Supreme Court records, they are all housed at the Illinois State Archives here in Springfield. So, any researcher can go to the state archives and look up whatever case they want to. One of the projects that we're working on here at the Commission, the Supreme Court Historic Preservation Commission, is to identify all of those cases and digitize them so that researchers can have access, so they can compare, what was Lincoln's caseload like compared to John Todd Stewart or to Stephen Logan, or even to some of the Ottawa attorneys or the Mount Vernon attorneys when cases were going on in Ottawa and Mount Vernon after 1848. So, yeah, we're trying to prepare this information so that, researchers can get a better idea of what Lincoln's place was in terms of caseload.
And I'm excited about that, obviously. I set you up there. I was hoping that you were going to talk about, some of the ideas that we have for getting that material into the hands of researchers and using the power of the internet, digitizing this material. We literally can have a worldwide audience, and it can lead to such a greater understanding of the 19th century, Abraham Lincoln's world, the world that we inherited. So this is unfair to you, John, and I apologize in advance. Maybe this will be our last question, and then we will throw it to Chris and Heather. And I want to get at the viewers' questions for sure. But before we do that, I want to be unkind to you for 1 second. And I want to ask you, you can answer it one of two ways. What's your favorite case of Abraham Lincoln before the Illinois Supreme Court? Or if you don't have a favorite, which I can understand, can you just give us a sense of what a case Lincoln handled before the Supreme Court might be like? Huge questions, significant questions that would change judicial history in Illinois and the country, perhaps? What do you say?
Okay. All right. There's a little bit to unpack there. So I don't know if I have a favorite case, but there are a couple of cases that occurred in 1846, which I kind of find fascinating. And it's that there are affidavits in these cases in which Lincoln wrote, and it's basically the same one in these two cases. But it says that, I was the attorney of record in this case. The attorney from wherever asked me to be involved in this case, and I forgot about it. And so the case ended up getting dismissed. So with this affidavit, I'm trying to get the case reinstated to the Supreme Court. In both cases, the court did; they took it. But I find those two cases. And there are other examples of this, but I find those two interesting because it shows the human Lincoln. As we were talking about earlier, we kind of mythologize Lincoln a little bit. And, with these two cases showed that, he's human. He forgot about these two cases and they slipped through the cracks. And so, but he did something to take care of it. So I like that. As far as like his general practice, there was, another one of his, I don't know if you'd call it famous case, but he had a $3 hog case that went to the Illinois Supreme Court. And, when I talk to attorneys about that today, people like, a $3 hog, why would a case like that even get to the Supreme Court? Well, it goes back to what we said earlier about, there was no other avenue for an appeal. So the Supreme Court had to take a $3 hog case. But on the opposite end of that spectrum, Lincoln was an attorney for the Illinois Central Railroad, which I kind of briefly alluded to earlier about whether a county can assess taxes on a railroad line when the state had exempted it from state taxes. Lincoln argued that question. That's the famous McLean County tax case, which Lincoln argued at the Illinois Supreme Court, and he literally saved the Illinois Central millions of dollars in taxes because they own land, or not, but their line went all the way from Cairo to Galena. That was the main line, and then there was a branch line that went from Centralia to Chicago. So if McLean County was successful, like I said, the Illinois Central might have gone bankrupt, but Lincoln saved them from that, and then charged them $5,000 for his legal fee.
Oh, I love the idea that he argued a $3 hog case before the Illinois Supreme Court. That's a good one. 46, you say that he, sort of misplaced two cases. I think that is really interesting for a couple different reasons. 46, he's running for Congress. The lead up to when he wins the nomination to run against our favorite Peter Cartwright, it's not an easy process either. The run up to getting that nomination, he's, at a little bit of hostilities with members of his own party, members of his own family. John J. Hardin, a cousin of Mary Todd Lincoln. Lincoln tries to wrestle that nomination out of his hands. He hopes that Ed Baker doesn't want to run again for Congress. So I think it's interesting that he sort of drops the ball in those cases in 46, as he's got all this other context going on. Again, makes him a little bit human. Mm-hmm. We think about, and I think about Stephen Logan, his second law partner. It was important to Logan as he took Lincoln on to get Lincoln to focus on the law. Mm-hmm. Lincoln doesn't run for office while he is a partner with Logan. And I think you alluded to it earlier, that partnership is so critical for Lincoln's legal career, his development in becoming a good lawyer. And of course, we get to see really the birth of his practice before the Illinois Supreme Court during that partnership.
Right.
So Illinois Supreme Court, significant aspect of Mr. Lincoln's legal career, more than 400 cases before the court. The court was a little different than it is today. And so we have to account for that. There's different constitutions it's operating under. For folks who want to learn more about the Supreme Court, what do you think the best book is on Abraham Lincoln's legal career?
Ooh,
I know what I
think. Question. I like Mark Steiner's book. Yeah. It's a nice comprehensive book, but if you want an easy read, I still like John J. Duff's book, A Lincoln Prairie Lawyer, which was published in 1960. Steiner's is really in depth, kind of maybe a follow up to John Frank's book. But yeah, if you just want a nice, easy read, John Duff.
And I agree with you on the Steiner book. I think it's a beautiful book in many respects. And thanks to the good work at the Lincoln Legal Papers, biographies that you read of Abraham Lincoln today, they include definitely a full chapter, but you get to see Lincoln's legal career really blossom during his life. And the good Lincoln biographies out there take a shot at explaining why his legal career was so significant. I think I would argue, I think you would argue, without Lincoln's background as a lawyer, without those 25 years traveling the circuit, that presidency would look a heck of a lot different. And you and I and Guy Fraker would agree the presidency would have never even been a consideration had Lincoln not been that lawyer.
Yeah, let me just point out here real quick. There have been 26 lawyers, I think, who have been president. I don't think any of them, though, really had a sustained career like Abraham Lincoln. So, I like to make this argument, that Lincoln's, experience of dealing with, angry farmers, deserted wives, and unpaid creditors, really helped him in dealing with angry generals, deserting soldiers, and wanting to be paid office seekers while he was president.
That's beautiful. I agree with you 100%, John. Let's open it up to some questions. I'm excited to see what folks out there are interested in, and we will do our best to try to field some questions.
All righty. Wow, what a fascinating conversation, I've got to tell you. I want to touch on a couple of things, and Sam, you just hit this right on the head. One of the things that I had come across talked about Lincoln as a trial lawyer and his flexibility in trial. And, you're talking about how through these experiences, he becomes a better politician. I think that's a perfect analogy. But he would shift strategy in the middle of a case if he sensed it wasn't resonating with his jury. And in line with what you were saying, Sam, I see this in his actions as president. He changes his mind on policy. He reevaluates situations. And I would have to agree that his time as a lawyer really honed those skills that made that all possible.
A couple of things come to my mind, Chris and John. see what you think about this. Only a lawyer could have written the Emancipation Proclamation.
Yeah.
It is a very carefully worded document that is a calculated risk on many in many respects. The significance of Lincoln's legal career, I don't think it can be overstated during the presidency. I love what John had to say as we sort of ended this conversation. There's a new book out right now that Michael Burlingame has written that really analyzes the marriage between Abraham and Mary. And one of these points that he makes in this book, which is intriguing, is he attributes the relationship that Lincoln had with Mary Lincoln, which in Professor Burlingame's telling of the story, it is a rocky relationship. It is a relationship that tries Abraham Lincoln's patience at every turn. And so Professor Burlingame makes an argument that learning those skills about how to get along, how to find a compromise, how to not hold a grudge and move forward, today's a new day, was essential for Abraham Lincoln as president of the United States. He makes this analogy. Maybe there's something to that, but where I see that trait being honed is the legal career. Every single day as a lawyer, Abraham Lincoln's dealing with individuals who are at odds. They're looking for the legal system to provide some remedy. And I think Lincoln sort of hones that those traits from his law career. What do you think about that, John? I'm sure you would agree with some of that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as a lawyer, he's dealing with people at their worst. You don't go to a lawyer and say, hey, I'm having a great day. I got nothing to give you. So it's, I'm fighting with my neighbor about this, or I need to get divorced from my wife because of this, or my husband because of this. So yeah, you're dealing with people at their worst. And, I think Lincoln as a compassionate person, wanted to help people, and the legal system was the way to do that. Yeah,
that makes perfect sense. You were talking about your favorite Illinois Supreme Court cases, and I'm really glad you didn't mention the one I'm going to bring up now, because I didn't realize it was an Illinois Supreme Court case until I started researching for this particular program. The Effie Afton and the Rock Island Railroad Bridge. For those of you that aren't familiar, this is a case that Lincoln takes representing the railroads once again. And correct me if I'm wrong. I don't believe it was Illinois Central, was it?
No, it was actually, I don't remember what the railroad was.
Yeah, it was something. And
it was not the Illinois Central, correct?
Yeah, but it was the first railroad bridge to cross the Mississippi River. And the story goes that approximately 15 days after the bridge opens up, I think it was May the 6th, this steamboat, the Effie Afton, goes through this bridge and then loses power, swings back, crashes into the bridge, catches fire. The boat is burned down and the bridge is damaged. And the boat companies sue the railroads. Could one of you tell this story with a little more detail than I can?
I'll just make one quick correction. It actually did not go to the Illinois Supreme Court. It was in the federal court.
Okay. Well, that would explain why it was in Chicago.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Right. It was It was in the Northern District of Illinois.
Interesting, because I actually was seeing that referred to.
But it is one of Lincoln's most famous cases. Getting back to what Sam was saying, these earlier biographies of Lincoln, they would really only mention about 4 or 5 cases. McLean County tax case, Effie Afton, the Almanac trial, and a couple of others that they would always mention in every biography. But actually, that was one of his more famous cases, and Lincoln was arguing on the side of the railroad. Biographers used that to show that Lincoln was for this newer form of transportation. But what we found in our research is that he had about 150 total cases dealing with railroads. He was on the side of the railroad about 75 cases, and he was against the railroad in about 75 cases. So the argument that he was this corporate railroad attorney isn't exactly correct, but he did exclusively practice for the Illinois Central Railroad, except for the one time where he was suing them to recover his $5,000 fee.
Yes, you got to love that. So how significant, I know in the case of the F.A. Afton, it actually sets a legal precedent that I believe still stands today. But how significant were the cases that he had with the railroads? Are there other situations where his work becomes the standard for law as we move forward?
Yeah, actually, there's a series of cases that happened in the 1850s. And Lincoln is on the side of the railroad. Basically, the way railroads were making money is that they had subscribers, so stock subscribers. And this one stock subscriber refused to pay his share because the railroad was going to change the course of the road, so it would bypass his property, whereas before it was going through his property. So he's like, well, I'm not going to make money on this deal, so I just won't pay my stock subscription anymore. Well, the railroad with Lincoln sued him and won. So that set this precedent, which was, established there, that you can't get out of your stock subscriptions if the railroad changes the course of the road. So fast forward a couple years, and there's more cases of like this going through the system, and Lincoln starts taking the cases for the stock subscriber. So in a sense, Lincoln is trying to overturn the very precedent that he argued to set a few years earlier. So by about 1860, I think, was one of the last ones that Lincoln was involved with this, and he was involved in, I think, maybe 4 cases where he was trying to overturn the precedent. And the last one, the Illinois Supreme Court finally said, we've heard this case enough already. The precedent's been established in the Barrett case. We're not going to deal with these types of cases anymore.
Interesting. Now, we've got a couple of questions here from the audience. Somebody wants to know, out of the 400 cases that Lincoln argues before the Illinois Supreme Court, and of course that also includes his associates, how many did he actually win?
Cool. I'm not sure how to answer that question.
It's a good question because it's one we get all the time. It's one that I remember asking John more than 20 years ago when I first started working for the Lincoln Legals. I looked at it back then as, what was Abraham Lincoln's batting average, right? How many times did he win versus lose? John, do you remember kind of what you told me? It's probably what you tell everybody who asks this question.
Yeah, I basically say that it's kind of hard to tell a one-loss record. Now, at the Supreme Court, it's probably a little bit easier because, cases, sometimes either just overturned or it's affirmed. So, but, I don't have that number off the top of my head, but in general, it's kind of hard to say because sometimes a win isn't necessarily a win.
Sure.
So like if I'm suing Sam for, $2,000 in debt, I win the case, but I only get $5.
Yeah.
It's a win, but is it really a win?
Yeah. Yeah.
He had to be doing something right because he is retained so often. And if he is to extend the analogy, if he's striking out every time he goes before the Supreme Court, I'm probably not going to hire him to take on my case.
True.
Well, and as you mentioned, attorneys in counties far away from wherever the Supreme Court was being held would hire Lincoln as their representative to try their cases, which certainly would suggest that he had a solid track record with that. Yeah. Someone here wants to know about Stephen Douglas, and they say he served as Associate Justice of the Illinois Supreme Court, and they were curious how long did Douglas serve as Associate Justice?
Yeah, so Douglas was really behind. I mentioned earlier how the court went from 4 to 9 members, and that was because of a case that the Democrats weren't happy about the judgment on. It was regarding the Secretary of State. Lincoln wasn't involved in it, but the Democrats saw this other case that was coming up about voting rights for immigrants. And so they were convinced that the three Whig majority, three to one Whig majority on the court would vote against their interests. So Douglas kind of led this movement to pack the court, increase the size to 9 members. And so, Douglas kind of shepherded that whole process through. And because the Illinois General Assembly elected justices at that time, and the Illinois General Assembly was controlled by Democrats, the 5 new members on the court were all Democrats. So Democrats now had a 6-3 majority on the court. And as a reward for Douglas doing his work, Douglas got the last seat. So in 1841, he was elected to the Illinois Supreme Court, where he served until 1843, when he ran for and won a seat in the U.S. Congress.
So it's during the Lincoln-Douglas debates, Lincoln refers to Douglas as Judge Douglas throughout those debates, showing respect. But Lincoln starts out his attack on Douglas in the 1850s after the Kansas-Nebraska Act by talking about what a success Douglas has been in his political career, his ascent through state government, as well as House of Representatives and, of course, the United States Senate. Douglas is as big of a name as you can get. Lincoln conversely says, with me, that quest has been a failure. He sort of integrates his background. He was never as successful in gaining office, he says, in the 1850s. So as a result, Lincoln becomes a pretty good lawyer. He's got to pay the bills. He travels the circuit. He builds up a pretty successful practice. I think we can say, and John, you correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but I've always read it as Douglas, he has the good fortune to have a pretty amazing political career, and the legal career sort of goes by the wayside. He's arguing, he's trying to fundamentally change America in the legislative branch, not the judicial branch.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah, I mean, I think he saw the Supreme Court as more of a stepping stone to higher political office than as a long-term career.
What was he on the Supreme Court? Maybe 2 years?
2 years, yeah, 41 to 43.
Okay. Well, you made a very interesting point, which hadn't really occurred to me earlier, when you spoke about the fact that Douglas, being a Democrat in a Democratic state, could chase his political career and still maintain some presence as a lawyer, whereas Lincoln, in a state of Democrats, was not able to do that. He either does one thing or the other. It just really gives you some deeper insights into Lincoln the man and the times that they're living in. So much of this is different than we normally assume it is, just based on our understanding of today. I have got another question from the audience that I have been asked twice, so I got to get this one in. They want to know about legal fees in Mr. Lincoln's time. Any thoughts on those?
Yeah, that's a great question. Lincoln, made a lot of his money just by the sheer volume of his cases.
Yeah.
So he was making, for just a typical case, he was making $5, $10, $20 per case. He didn't charge by the hour like attorneys nowadays do. So he would, again, just charge by the case, usually taking a little bit of money up front. And then once he finished the case, he would take the rest of it. Now, at the federal court and the Illinois Supreme Court, he was earning a little bit higher fees there because, those cases involved a little bit more work, more research, and at least at the federal level and sometimes at the Supreme Court level, there was much more money involved,
Sure.
Other than the $3 hog case. So he was making, significantly more money at the federal level at the Supreme Court than he was at the circuit level. But, we figure that he was probably making, by the time he was done, by around late 1850s, he was probably making about $10,000 to $15,000 per year, which if you multiply by about 30, kind of equates that to today's money. So 10 times 30 is
300 grand.
300 grand a year, which is not bad for an attorney. Not bad for anyone.
And, it's important, too, to keep in mind that that's at the end of Mr. Lincoln's legal career.
Sure.
Absolutely.
It takes him a lifetime to get up to that point where he is a relatively wealthy-ish individual in Springfield. He's certainly not in the upper echelons of wealthy individuals in Illinois. That's not the case. But I always like to, historic places matter. And take a look at the Lincoln home, how it grows in size over the years. That's a good indicator of Mr. Lincoln's income increasing, as well as his prestige, certainly.
And actually, some of his colleagues, they made their money, his legal colleagues, they made their money not necessarily from their legal career, but by land speculation. So like David Davis, most of his money came from land ownership. Same with Clifton Moore, who lived in just south of McLean County and DeWitt County. He owned, I think, most of the county at one point, I think.
Yeah.
So, they were making their money from land speculation, not so much. From their career, but they still had a significant law practice where they were bringing in income.
And I think it's important what you said too, John, about, Lincoln's income is largely the result of his caseload, the quantity of cases that he's taking. His colleagues would razz him from time to time about charging such small fees. You're going to keep charging those small fees. You're going to put me out of business. We have some of those cases, and I think the research backs up some of those anecdotal stories.
Now, just as a comparison, what would an average income for, say, a day laborer be in that era? $10,000 seems low to us now, but as you mentioned, that's pretty substantial money in that era.
Sure. There are individuals in Springfield during Mr. Lincoln's lifetime. If you're pulling down $1,000, $1,500, you're sort of seeing them make ends meet, so to speak. To pull down an income of $10,000 to $15,000 towards the end of Mr. Lincoln's lifetime, that's doing it. But that wasn't always the case.
Well, compared to the beginning of his career, where he was making only maybe $1,000 or $2,000 a year early in his career. So, like Sam said, there's this evolution to Lincoln's law practice, and we certainly see that in the types of cases that he had, but also with his income.
Yeah, and I go back to some of those letters that he writes to Speed while he's courting Mary Todd. And it's anxiety over not just your feelings and love and those things, but can I support a family?
Do I have enough money to support this wealthy woman?
Yeah. And interestingly enough, when I was reading about the Illinois Central case and the tax law situation that we spoke about earlier, there was a reference to the fact that he needed that money. He charged them, I think he was paid $4,800 ultimately, but he was financially fairly strapped at that point for whatever reason.
He got paid $5,000 total. He got a $200 retainer at the beginning of the so $5,000 total. But one thing to remember here is that he and Herndon shared fees 50-50. So Herndon got $2,500 of that $5,000. And by that same token, Lincoln was getting half of whatever Herndon was earning, whether it was on the circuit or at the Supreme Court, and whatever other office business that Herndon was doing. So it was a true partnership in that way. But there are some. This case, was early, and there's some talk that it kind of funded a lot of his political travels in 1856. And there are some examples where I think in 59 he was invited to give a speech, I think in Columbus, Ohio, or Cincinnati somewhere, and he turned it down because he said that he spent all of last year campaigning for the Senate seat, and so he's got to go back to the law to make some money again.
That makes sense. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. I got to tell both of you that the work you're doing adds that extra dimension into the to the real story of Abraham Lincoln, who the man was, how he worked, how his thinking and his viewpoint evolves over time to become, one of our nation's greatest presidents. So I really appreciate the effort you do. John, I was actually in Rushville when you did the document collecting project, and it seems to me they found a document that Lincoln had signed in our courthouse basement. So I know firsthand how big the deal that was in that town in that era.
Yeah.
Well, let me just wind up with one final question. And again, my thanks to both of you. The Illinois Supreme Court Historic Preservation Commission. Now, I had never heard of it until we did this, and I'm really beginning to understand the impact you've had on the Lincoln legacy. And I'm loving the fact that you're already plotting and scheming ways to expand and use this information to a greater depth. Could you tell us a little bit about what your mission is and what role you see the commission playing in sharing and expanding the Lincoln legacy down the road?
Yeah, great question, and thank you for that. The commission is basically the historical arm for the Illinois judiciary. So our goal is basically just to educate people about the history of the judicial branch of Illinois. A lot of people don't even realize that we have a third branch of government and how it operates. So, a lot of our work is educational. So we do, museum exhibits, we do talks. So, basically just to, spread the word about the history of the judicial branch. Probably one of our more popular programs that we've done is our History on Trial series, where we use historical cases to showcase a modern public policy issue. But in terms of, what we can do for Lincoln, obviously Lincoln had a large practice before the Illinois Supreme Court, and we can continue to use Lincoln, to bring people into our fold about, our mission, what we do, and to, again, just help educate people about the judicial branch of Illinois government.
Sam, do you have any thoughts to wind up with?
Well, Chris, I'm a newcomer to the commission. I enjoyed my experience as the state historian of Illinois for the last 4 years. Enjoyed my time educating folks from around the world about the life and times, the legacy of Abraham Lincoln. But I'm thrilled to be part of the commission. As the state historian of Illinois, look at a book on Illinois history and count the words that are devoted to the judicial history of our state. Very small. Most of that book is going to be about the executive branch and the legislative branch. We have a heck of a story to tell. We're a co-equal branch of Illinois government. And when we really inspect the judicial branch, you could make an argument that the judicial branch affects our everyday life, perhaps even more than those other branches of government. And so getting to work with kids, getting to promote civics education, understanding how the judicial branch evolved in Illinois history, it's an awesome story to tell. And our most famous participant is Abraham Lincoln. So we've got a lot of help.
Yeah, just to sum it up real quickly, the history of law is the history of society.
Oh, absolutely. And I have learned so much more about the Illinois Supreme Court through this podcast than I would have ever dreamed. I, as a person not deeply knowledgeable about that, I think in terms of the modern day Supreme Court, it never occurred to me that you went from a trial to the Supreme Court in Illinois. So I can really see how, as the court develops and our state develops, there's stories that will illuminate our growth as a nation and our growth as a state. And the Lincoln legacy is a wonderful way to open that door to these conversations.
Yep.
Well, thank you both very much for joining us tonight. It's been a fascinating evening. I want to thank the Illinois Arts Council who are sponsoring this. And I want to particularly thank the Abraham Lincoln National Heritage Area, Looking for Lincoln, Heritage Coalition, Sarah Watson, and Heather Wickens for making this all possible. Thanks to our audience for joining us, and be sure to join us for our ongoing series of Lincoln Conversation live stream shows. Good night, everyone.